And welcome back to Restless. I'm Father Joseph Gill in the Diocese of Bridgeport, coming to you live out of Stamford, Connecticut, along with Diane, Lauren, and special guest Mary Kulhanek. Thank you so much for joining us, Mary.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is her second episode. We're very grateful. She came on earlier to talk about Humanae Vitae. And so now we're going to kind of talk about Humanae Vitae Part 3, which is really kind of about natural family planning and what that is, what that entails. And it's kind of, in a very real way, the best kept secret, perhaps in the church and in the world. Because I tell you, when I meet with married couples, I always require them to take a course in it. And I ask them, do you know what NFP is? And almost everyone said, no, I never heard about it. Completely unknown. And Mary, you said you didn't learn about it during your marriage prep.
No, it was left out of my pre-Cana experience. I stumbled upon it on my own, my own, I guess the Holy Spirit inspired me. I can't really think of another reason why I looked into it, really. My husband and I ended up buying books and taking a class and figuring it out on our own, and have used different methods throughout the course of our not very long 5.5-year marriage.
It's longer than all of us combined. We're at
That's
0.
True. That is true. I got that on you. But,
Well, Lauren and Diane, did you ever hear about natural family planning before taking this study that you'd taken?
I did, but only probably when I was like maybe 25 or so.
So it wasn't taught in your high school biology class or even
not
by your parents?
No, I'd never heard of it.
I learned of it when I started going to St. John's.
Yeah.
And I think probably at the Humanae Vitae conference, there was someone there that was promoting it, or a teacher, and they explained it a little bit, but I never knew what it was, no.
To be honest, though, I never really studied, human sexuality. So it was just not something that at that time, I was focused on school and whatever. I was not thinking about any of that stuff either. So.
But you are saying that any married couple who does pre-Cana should have this introduced to them at that time?
Yes, if not earlier. I mean, I can remember growing up, my parents had books about it in their home because they practiced it. And so I got an education when I was younger about it. I mean, it was just very normal to talk about.
Yeah, I think the earlier the better. A lot of times by the time you get to pre-Cana, not that you're too late.
You have a lot of your visions.
You have a lot of world experience and a lot of influences already. And for that to be the introduction to the church's teaching on sexuality, I think does a disservice.
Definitely. Because when I used to do marriage prep, I used to ask the couples, well, how many kids do you want to have? And inevitably it'd be 2. Maybe if I was lucky, they'd say 3, And now I realize I'm not asking that question anymore because that's a terrible question, because they're coming from a completely worldly viewpoint where they've already decided how many kids they want to have, which is not the right attitude to enter into it. So, with you and your husband, Mary, did you have a plan for how many kids you were going to have, or just completely open to whatever God had in store?
Yeah, I would say we definitely had a picture. It was more than 2, actually. It was like 3 or 4.
Okay.
So we have one at home right now, and I'm cooking number 2 right now. Expecting it's my second. So, but yeah, I mean, I think one of the things about NFP is how you have to really be open to God's plan. And even if you have the picture of a large family in your head, that might not be what necessarily happens. And that can be a disappointment in a different way, and I think that's something that when we say we're open to God's plan, it's really, truly an openness to whatever number He wants for you.
It's something that came up, I think, several times when we all were in Endow together, is that notion of so many women say they want their boy and their girl and they're done. And it just seems like everyone thinks they're in control of that.
Birth control.
Yeah. They get to choose, how many kids and exactly when they want them. And, if it's someone who's been on birth control, let's say for 10 years, 15, it's like, I'm going to get off. I'll have my kid. I'll wait. I'll have my next kid. This is my plan. But I think a lot of people end up facing this harsh reality that they're not in control.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. Diane, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to your point at that study too, there were, I think we talked about a lot of women who are on birth control for many years, and they think as soon as they come off, they're going to be able to get pregnant, easy, whatever. And I mean, to Mary's point, I think it's really God, like you have to be open to God's plan, and we don't know, necessarily what that is. I think the biggest takeaway from that study too is that like children are a gift. They're not a disease. They're not, something people kind of treat, kids as like this disease or something that needs to be treated. And that's not the case.
Or they treat them as if they're a commodity.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to go and purchase my kid now.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, exactly. And so the study in NFP really just teaches you to be like, I think the most important thing is you can't have this like number in your head. That's the struggle of sort of the Christian life of like making yourself essentially God, wanting to be in control of everything. And you really, it's an active self-surrender and trust. And I think that's where the beauty of NFP too, in that Christ is the center of your relationship and your sex, is that, like you're prayerfully discerning with God, what is your plan for our marriage and our future. So
is that a scary experience to surrender that aspect of your life to God?
Yes.
Really?
A little bit sometimes. Yeah, it can.
But don't we all feel that
But
way?
right, I think
Like any major thing, or I mean, I like with you becoming a priest, I imagine there's a little bit fear. Like, am I really gonna? I mean,
Yeah, no, sure.
Yeah.
I would
anything
agree.
entering into your marriage. It could even be like taking that next leap, or like a new job, or moving. But we have that benefit as Catholics that we can give it up to God, rely on God, trust in His plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You try to live without fear, but there are moments where it's a little scary, not knowing what's going to come next. But that's, to your point, that's many things in life.
Sure.
Certainly.
Sure. But now here's a wrench I want to throw into this, is that some people say that NFP is nothing but Catholic contraception. How do you respond to that?
That's just a catchy little phrase, right? I mean, that's why they're saying it.
But I think it makes an important point that NFP can be used with a contraceptive mentality.
I think it can. I have heard this phrase before. I think it's more difficult to use NFP with a contraceptive mentality. The nature of it involves a communication about the topic of life and about your marriage and your family every month or so. And so I think, falling into that trap of, what are we discerning? What are our reasons for avoiding? It looks different when you're making that decision for the here and now, maybe today or the next week, versus, I'm going on a pill, or maybe getting an IUD put in. And you're making that decision for really more of a long-term
Sure.
thing. I think you're not having that conversation with your spouse or a conversation with God frequently.
You may disagree with me, so feel free to do so, because I'm not married, so I have the perspective of not really having any practical consequences for this thought. But it would seem to me that if you're practicing NFP, it seems like the default should be open to life, unless there's a reason to abstain.
Yeah. Because I think when we talk about NFP, and this is a really good point that I think you should make, is you're not required to use NFP, right? NFP is, natural family planning is a valid method for avoiding or spacing your children. But we're not obliged to use NFP. You can just live your life as a happily married couple and just be open to life at any point in time. It's just that, the church is aware, again, in her wisdom, that there are reasons to need to space children or avoid at a particular time for many reasons. And that discernment is really left up to the couple.
Yeah. The distinction I like to make between NFP and birth control is the distinction between dieting and bulimia.
Yeah.
Because in dieting, you're saying, I don't want the effects, so I'm not going to indulge in the pleasure. In bulimia, you say, I don't want the effects, but I also want the pleasure.
I also think NFP is very honest about, what sex is and what a marriage is, in that, with sex, even when you're practicing NFP, there's always the possibility of having a child. That's sex was made for bonding and babies, and those two things are always there and there's no avoiding it. And any dishonesty around that, or saying like those two things aren't a part of sex, it just.
But what's the success rate of NFP?
I think it's actually fairly high. It's in the high 90s, which I think is right up there with the perfect use of most artificial contraceptions. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, perfect use of anything, any of those methods. I always laugh because when they say, well, the pill is 99.9% effective, I'm like, yeah, that's with perfect use. And,
sure, you can't skip
people
a
are
day.
human, right? Yeah, people are human. So I think when you look at the practical effective percentage, I think it's lower than that with most artificial contraceptions. So.
Yeah. One of I heard a CD, I think it was by Jason Everett perhaps, or Christopher Wester, one of those chastity speakers, about the negative effects of some of the artificial birth control from simply a biological standpoint.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that husbands are requesting women to put in their bodies is really so detrimental, with the connections with breast cancer and just the chemicals.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're putting something into your body that's not supposed to be there. And I think, our culture right now is very much into trying to live a healthy lifestyle. Like, you look at the line at Whole Foods or whatnot, and, and these same people who are, only buying organic this. And, I even heard once somebody was buying an organic mattress for themselves. But, then they're maybe on the pill, and it's like, well, have you thought about that?
Yeah.
No, it's so true. It almost seems completely hypocritical that people will pump in artificial hormones, right? I mean, there's no real hormones in any kind of hormonal birth control. And the natural producing, women's hormones are suppressed because of this artificial crap that's just flowing through their bodies. And there are some immediate, adverse effects, like changes in mood, depression, developing blood clots, right? Yeah. Crazy things, like with your heart. I've heard, I had a friend, I think, that had this horrible reaction to something, that required surgery, like really serious, a heart condition. But then there's also these things that manifest much later. Like you said, like it could lead to breast cancer. But I found one article from a doctor who said that she wouldn't prescribe birth control in good conscience anymore. And she touched on, effects later on: irritable bowel syndrome, autoimmune diseases, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, atherosclerosis, I don't know what that is, heart disease, diabetes, insulin resistance, kidney disease, poor vaginal health, and even dementia.
Oh.
There's so many possible things.
It's quite a lineup.
Yeah, but I mean, your hormones are what keep you healthy. They send messages throughout the body and cause things to happen. And so if you're tampering with or suppressing or, infecting them in any way, it's just kind of basic common sense, right? That there's going to be some effects to this.
Yeah, you're taking something that's working well and deliberately breaking it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because pregnancy is not a disease.
Or even just, the cycle.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what the great thing of NFP. I haven't studied it. I haven't learned it. I haven't been taught it. But that one conference I went to, who was the doctor that was there, Diane?
Dr. Nolte?
Yeah. Dr. Nolte gave a presentation, and she just touched on some things, that the cervical fluid changes throughout the cycle, and that the majority of the time it's actually like a web, and it's, serving to protect, and then it'll change and become like these channels.
Yep.
And there's visible signs of that. And it's like, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that the body does that. It's just helpful to know how your body works and what it's doing. And it's just this perfect design by God that most of us don't even know.
Yeah. I mean, when my husband and I, started studying it together, it was like mind blowing how well the body works, especially the female body, and how your bodies can work together. And it's really, there is science behind it. There's biology.
To most of us, it's just a mystery. And, unfortunately, birth control pills are given to girls at very young ages if they have any kind of debilitating symptoms. It's like, here, give her this. And it just seems like not enough people are looking into well, is this healthy for me or not? Do I really need this? Can we actually look into what's causing this or find another solution?
Yeah. I think too, I mean, not only from like the physical health perspective, but spiritual health. I mean, contraception is a grave sin. So, it's really important for people to understand what the church teaches from a moral perspective. So one of the things that we learned in this study was that the church, asked us to consider three things: the object chosen, the end or the intention, and the circumstances of the action. And if any one of those elements is out of harmony, that, like an act it can never be morally illicit. So, the sexual act is geared towards the generation of new life, and a distortion of that is a sin against nature. It's intrinsically evil. So, for people to understand that, a lot of things that arguments that I hear is sort of like, well, the intention, right? Like in NFP and contraception, the intention is to prevent pregnancy. So that's a commonality. But, even though those couples have that same goal to avoid pregnancy, the difference is the means. Like couples who contracept are sterilizing the marital act by impeding that procreative, potential of sex, whereas couples who use NFP don't sterilize the marital act, and they just don't. They kind of work with God's design. So I think it's really important to understand sort of the morality of this, and that we're talking about, we're talking about a grave matter. And so that's very important, I think, for people to understand and to really study sort of like the why are these things different.
Yeah, that's very true. It's, I'm reminded of what Our Lady said at Fatima when she said to the three children that more souls go to hell because of sins of the flesh than any other sins, because it is always grave matter, when we deal with sins of the flesh, and particularly this one, which is so widespread, where it's well over 90% of Catholic couples are using artificial birth control, and partly because I think the culture has shifted so drastically, because it was unthinkable up until 1930. Nobody, not even Protestants, accepted it, and then the Protestants started accepting it for just small reasons, and then kind of snowballed from there into the fact that it's not even talked about in Protestant circles anymore. And unfortunately, it's not talked much about in Catholic circles either. I've tried to kind of obliquely deal with it. One of the challenges I have on Sunday masses is I can't say things sometimes too explicitly for 7-year-olds that are sitting in the congregation.
Yeah.
And I have to try to reach the 80-year-olds too, who for this would not be a practical issue. So I've tried to mention just about the necessity of being open to life, and I hope they kind of read between the lines and understand kind of what I'm trying to say. But I think, definitely when talking with, high school students or college students or young adults, this is when these topics should be brought up, and the emphasis should be on the grave moral evil that contraception is.
Absolutely.
I think that understanding is certainly missing, right? Like you just touched on. Over 90% of Catholics do use contraception. So I just wonder, do they even know this is a mortal sin? Or do they just say, well, that's ridiculous, that I can't use birth control. I can't have, potentially 10 children. I can't afford that many, So I don't know. How do we?
Well, that's why I think it's so important. Like this, I feel sort of called by God in some way as a mission to like get this understanding out, because a lot of people will just use that excuse of like, well, the intention is the same, to avoid pregnancy, so why would I use NFP over this pill, which is much easier and whatever. So I think
that's beautiful. You feel called to spread this message.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we can't just sit on it, right? I mean, we know that this is an issue, and the fact that it's a grave matter, and this is the, like human sexuality is, it's such a gift, and sex is holy, and, it's just something that, if we're concerned with kind of the spreading of Christ's kingdom on earth, then I think that we need to take this very seriously and get the message out in whatever way we can. Obviously starting through this podcast, but, I would
encourage doing this episode.
That's right.
Yeah, but I would encourage everyone to kind of to study the morality of this, so that you can speak to friends and family, and just be open about, like, when these things come up and you hear someone talk about the pill, to explain, in layman's terms, why is this? Why does the church teach against contraception? Why is NFP? Why? What the difference is.
Well, something you said, Lauren, though, kind of helped me to understand a little bit deeper of why this is not so accepted. You talked about how why do people not know it's a mortal sin? But I think a lot of Catholics don't even recognize that a mortal sin is a thing. It doesn't even exist. And that's a challenge with the Catholic faith, is that it's a web, and every piece of the Catholic faith impacts another piece of the Catholic faith. So either you accept the whole web, or there's large pieces missing, and the pieces in isolation don't make any sense, right? So if people don't first accept Jesus Christ as the Lord of their life, and they're following him, and they understand that the church has been giving authority and teachings, and they understand the teachings about what the human body means, and that truth is not relative, that it's objective. So if you don't have all of that, and you don't understand that sin, mortal sin is real and hell is real, like this one teaching in isolation doesn't really resonate unless they have all that other kind of structure in place to understand it. And that's the challenge, is how can we put the structure in place so that when this teaching is presented to them, they don't wholesale just reject it and say, this is ridiculous, this is from the Middle Ages. Any insights on how to do that?
Oh boy, I think that's a couple other episodes on this podcast.
I think maybe.
No, but I mean, even just that we're here, right? We're spreading the faith in hopefully a somewhat interesting way, an enjoyable way to listen. I mean, I've shared before, I got a huge bump in my knowledge of the faith from participating in RCIA as an already confirmed Catholic. So that was huge for me. And I will just shout out again, Father Joseph Gill is an excellent teacher. So if you ever hear him give an announcement, RCIA is happening, If you want to stop by, you should stop by.
I think that's a great point because, for so many Catholics, their Catholic education really wraps up around 8th grade or 9th grade, depending on when they make confirmation. And that's really the last formal academic contact that you have with most Catholics. And, Humanae Vitae is not something,
you don't talk about.
You're not going to cover,
usually.
right. You're not going to cover that before 8th grade. Hopefully you're covering it ideally before they're coming to you in pre-Cana. But, getting them in that time period, how do you get to Catholics in that time period and talk to them and communicate this teaching with them?
Right.
I don't have an answer off the top of my head right now, but
young adult ministry.
I would also encourage to have those conversations, that require courage, right? Like it's real courage. And in my case, it's probably people in my own family, cousins, around my age, 20s and 30s. I'll hear comments here and there, about birth control, and I'll kind of think, ugh. For the health effects and the spiritual effects, but I don't know. So then I run into this too. Like if I tell them I might be removing their ignorance, and I don't know that I want to do that, right?
But if the church's teaching really leads to real happiness, wouldn't we want to have them experience real happiness?
Yeah, and love is willing the good of the other, and ultimately we want to get these souls to heaven. So if you cause a little heartbreak along the way and some hurt feelings, I think it's well worth it for Christ and his kingdom.
I think many times couples, they're living in a place of fear and they might not know it. A lot of people, and I've heard this from married couples. They're like, oh, well, we can't handle another right now, because it's chaos having little kids, especially, when they physically need you as a child. And then as they get older, there's school things and this and that. And you feel like you have to keep up with all of it. And they sometimes feel they don't have the capacity for another one. And that's really a place of fear that you're living in. It's not a place of trust. And the goal here is trust in God in everything.
Sure.
No, that's so true. I know I can just share personally, like seeing the divine mercy image, right? Jesus, I trust in you. When I first saw that, it's like, oh yeah, of course. Like what's so hard about that? But then when you actually apply it to your life and try to live it out. So in the case of a married person, it's like putting the trust in God, right? Being open to life, not using contraception. That's this huge leap, that really living in trust of God.
I do wonder, though, and it absolutely that's very true. But how much of that trust is, or that lack of trust, that fear is just fear of I'm going to lose the nice lifestyle that I have. It's not even I'm going to be too busy, but I can't go on these vacations. People are going to give me weird looks.
I think that can happen sometimes. I'm not saying it's everyone, but yeah, I think that can.
Well, the other piece I see is that we all want to be in control of our lives, right? Like where we work, everything, our schedules, and we're so overscheduled generally, most of us. And living in a life of faith is putting it up to God. letting the Holy Spirit guide you, right? And, Diane and I have both met religious who do this and live this way. And, it's their motto, I guess. But there's a truth to it that I think we as lay people are, I don't know, just living in the world we live in today, we lose that.
But in many respects, it takes more trust to live in the world we live in today.
I think one thing, too, that we have to remember is that all these teachings on contraception and sort of just, marital chastity can seem impossible, but we have grace through the sacraments. So the sacraments are key. And you have grace through the sacrament of marriage to be able to live this out. So I think, people just need to, for sure, get to Mass, the Eucharist, like receive the Eucharist as often as you can and just really, just remember that there's grace out there, in order to be able to live these truths.
That's such a great point. And there's confession for the times that we fail.
Exactly.
And another key just made me think of is get married in the church.
That's how a sacrament
Because,
happens.
I mean, that's on the decline, right?
Yeah, it is.
Everyone feels like, oh, I can get married outside. Oh, yeah, my partner doesn't really want to get married in the church, so we're not.
That's very true.
This
Deprive
is a
yourself
big
of great
problem.
sacramental grace. Yeah.
And people just have no idea, I don't think, or they think it's not important, or I don't know if they realize that God is involved.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I'd say don't be afraid of sacrifice. I'm sure you...
Yeah.
Would you say, Mary, that since you've had your first child, you've learned a whole new meaning of sacrifice?
Yes, but in a good way.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good to hear.
No, absolutely. I mean, when you have a baby, they have, every need that they have has to be met by you or by someone,
Right.
like my spouse or, someone around me. Their every need needs to be met, and that's sacrificial. That means, at 3 a.m, that means when I want to be doing something else, that means, if my husband and I are enjoying a movie, that, but that sacrifice, it's so great. I literally love being a mom. So
Awesome.
yeah. So it doesn't feel like much of a sacrifice to me.
And that's the beauty of marriage, too, of the spouses are supposed to help each other to get to heaven. And that sort of sacrifice and self-gift, that is how we get to heaven,
Yeah.
giving of ourselves completely.
Yeah.
So.
Especially in the beginning, many of the needs that my son needs right at the beginning are met by me, by the mother, from a physical standpoint. And then, I fortunately have a spouse who loves and supports me. And that's so important. Because then he's kind of helping me meet my own needs, I'm sitting there on the couch again, feeding my son, and I'm like, well, I need to eat too. And,
So he'll make dinner.
Yeah, the practicalities of that, and that's one way that he shows me love in a time of like in that time post birth.
Yeah. Awesome.
So.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Mary, on our episode today.
Thank you for having me.
Here's my challenge for all those listening. So if you're married, be open to life. Investigate this teaching about the beauty of human sexuality, about the beauty of openness to life and from Humanae Vitae's perspective. If you're not married, form yourself ready if you're considering marriage, if you're discerning marriage, because this is a great teaching that you will use greatly in your future marriage with your spouse. And it's one that glorifies God, one that's challenging, but also one that's very life-giving and will lead you to great holiness. You can join us on Veritas Catholic Radio, 1350 AM, and also wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in next time to Restless.